Everybody, it would appear that the form is to offer a few sacrificial words before the microphone kicks in. I was fortunate to be on the receiving end of a great number of good ideas as to what sacrificial words I might offer, waiting for the microphone to kick in, but I discounted them all. In chairing this next session in this wonderful amphitheater of critical introspection, I feel that I'm heeding the advice that was given to us by Kirsten yesterday in her excellent presentation when she urged us to dare to be vulnerable. So why vulnerable? Well, much of the debate yesterday seemed to suggest that we experience a sinister and inevitable sequence of regression in our careers that leads to a point where those wearing red tabs lose the ability to think imaginatively and creatively. Why does that happen? Well, the sequence seems to be that young officers join the Army brimming with creative thought and good ideas. Their ability or talent is developed, it gets better as experience adds useful context to their intuition. That was a point that was made very powerfully by Herman yesterday. But then they lose it, disappointingly. The argument was yesterday on reaching the ranks of the General Staff. Then, and this is the really amazing thing, they regain it when they retire. And they can even look back and recall just how creative they had actually been as red tabs in hindsight in a period when presumably so many of their peers were floundering. Well, with the exception of me in the chair, a hopeless case, of course, there's absolutely no danger of templated thinking from our next panel, because they're still flourishing potentially in the most creative part of their careers. We've been challenged to accept that the business of force development is an argument. And if it's going to be most effective, that argument should make us feel uncomfortable. And we will continue in that vein now with a set of 4 presentations from Army officers who are currently studying at the Advanced Command and Staff course at the Joint Services Command and Staff College. But this is far more than a bunch of students taking a day off from Staff College. This is, I think, an example of our evolving approach to force development. Taking a team of particularly bright young leaders from the Army and letting them challenge us to a debate. I hope, as an approach, it is the polar opposite of any sense of hubris or complacency in our approach to force development and capability development. These are the senior leaders of tomorrow, currently poised to take unit-level command. Today, they've been encouraged to be controversial, and of course, no one in the room understands their personal perspectives of our business quite as well as they do. Lieutenant Colonel Nick English is an attack helicopter pilot in the Army Air Corps with 16 years of experience. He's had many operational deployments and frequently found himself working as part of multinational force packages. Nick will set the context for the individual presentations by introducing the overarching themes, which explore an apparent tension between the idea of efficiency and adaptability. And he'll talk about the role of leaders at all levels in working their way through that tension. Lieutenant Colonel Katie Hislop is a Royal Engineers officer with similarly impressive experience. She will assume command of 3-2 Engineer Regiment on completion of the staff course. Katie will address the challenge of maximizing the talent and realizing the potential of our people. Lieutenant Colonel Fraser McClellan adds some tone to the panel as an officer of the Royal Armoured Corps. And the fact that he comes from a Scottish regiment is surely something of a bonus. His recent operational experience includes command of a multinational company in Kabul, and Fraser will present on our opportunities for embedding the concept of adaptability into the Army through the generation of a learning culture. And Lieutenant Colonel Kieran Sheldon is an artillery officer who's spent the bulk of his 18-year career to date in close support artillery regiments. Away from regimental duty as a staff officer, he worked on Army operational pre-deployment training and the transition to a campaign footing in Afghanistan. He will speak to us today about the concept of adaptive training. In other words, preparing to face the unknown. Now, I suspect the audience has swelled in number a little bit since the break, so just to remind everybody about the RUSI rules, only prepared marks are on the record, and the subsequent question and answer discussion is strictly off the record. Okay, Nick.
Thank you, sir. CGS, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It's a real privilege to address this year's Land Warfare Conference. And despite coming from the Staff College, I can absolutely guarantee you there'll be no Clausewitz anywhere in the presentation. So the brief that CGS set us was to explore innovative approaches to confronting the twin challenges of uncertainty and constrained resources. Over the last 2 days, we've heard from many speakers about the different issues and kind of transformations that we need. To give us even half a chance of answering that question, we're instead going to take a different approach. And instead of looking top down as we have done, we're going to consider the challenge from the bottom up. What we've done is reflect on how we could create or exploit opportunities at the bottom of the army to kickstart the process of making us match fit. At unit level, we think that being match fit quite simply means being able to fight and win. Our message is that adaptability is fundamentally about people, whether that's fighting at the front line, managing the army as a business, or designing the army of the future. It's the humans that adapt. As Tim Harford eloquently put it yesterday, saying this is easy, achieving it is not. I'd love to say that through some deep thinking in a darkened Staff College room, we found the key that unlocks adaptability. But we haven't. We instead think there are several complementary strands of change that the army needs to develop further. And today we'll expose some of those that we feel offer the potential to get the process moving and illuminate the direction of travel. Judging from the number of times that transformation and innovation have been mentioned at the conference so far, it's tempting to think that massive change is the solution to all of our problems. However, these labels run the risk of becoming the next edition of Professor Cohen's pixie dust. Innovation means many things to many people, but at unit level, we think this is about creatively exploiting what we already have. We believe the challenge is clear, and that when you speak to our soldiers, they're very much up for meeting it. So, as Dr. Neil Barr illustrated yesterday, tactical adaptation has been part of the DNA of the British Army for a long time. We even have a piece of slang that captures that continuous iterative evolution that keeps us moving forward, and our habit of not fully capturing these developments. Reinventing the wheel. I can tell from the rolling eyes and the silent screams coming from inside that this simple phrase neatly illustrates the love-hate relationship we have with adaptability. In a unit, learning and adaptation costs us time and energy rather than money. More often than not, gaining experience requires us to relearn the old lessons as well as find the new ones, and that's exactly the point that James Sladden made yesterday, in that rediscovery is an essential part of adaptation rather than a failure. Nevertheless, when you go back to where you started, even if you've learned something along the way, our people often feel like their time and energy has somehow been wasted. As we explored the opportunities we might exploit, 3 overarching themes kept recurring. The first is that there appears to be a tension between efficiency and adaptability. To be truly efficient, we have to deliver our specified outputs with the minimum resources. This tends to drive us towards a centralized approach that's top-down directed, relatively inflexible, but efficient. Conversely, being an adaptable and learning organization means we have to use resources for 2 things, both specified outputs and for the things that make us evolve and stuff we can exploit. Whilst this can be flexible and empowering, in a world of specified outputs, it's inherently less efficient. For us, achieving adaptability at unit level hinged on finding or making the time that keeps the evolution rolling. This isn't about working harder. That's unsustainable. Instead, it's up to commanders to find that sweet spot between delivering routine management process, implementing our top-down change, and creating the space for learning. Our second theme concerns people. People make the Army adaptable, not equipment or processes. Although if you structure those well, they undoubtedly help. Whilst new management processes or structures may make adaptation possible at an organisational level, tactical adaptability is about having the courage and capability to try something new. To us, this is the essence of a brains-based approach. We believe that this requires a broad range of experiences, intellectual challenges, and the space to learn. Whilst exploiting opportunity is fundamentally a people business, it's not necessarily about making every person an innovator. If you're fighting a core-level synchronized plan, the last thing you need are rogue commanding officers unhinging the whole thing. Equally, you need to know when to try something new in order to fight to win. So finally, adaptability is at its heart a human activity. So you won't be surprised that we think that leadership, trust, and courage all play a pivotal role in delivering it. Adopting an adaptable approach relies on our leaders setting the behaviours that we value and reward and removing fear of failure. Saying this is true is not enough. We also need courage, and that's the courage to make mistakes and learn for ourselves, the courage to allow our subordinates to learn and not to judge them for it, and the courage to take risks to seize opportunity. These are easy things to say, but it takes time to build trust so that our people genuinely believe it. And this trust is fragile and easily broken. Nothing destroys our potential to be a learning organisation faster than someone failing to have the courage to allow our people to learn. So, we'll explore these broad themes by looking at 3 specific areas that we feel best illustrate the kind of opportunities that we could exploit to achieve the Army's vision of the future. Lieutenant Colonel Katie Hislop will tackle how we might make the most of our people, draw together diverse views, and reward a broad range of talent. Lieutenant Fraser McClellan is going to take on creating and maintaining a learning culture and exploiting the balance between hierarchical and flat thinking. And finally, Lieutenant Colonel Kieran Sheldon will look at some really tangible changes that might allow us to properly exploit training. Katie.
So recognising that our people are the adaptable part of the system, and noting as well that those I will shortly have the privilege to command will generally be motivated, capable and up for a challenge, then we start from strong foundations. And we also start from a point where every individual's potential is, in simplistic terms, front and centre of our appraisal system. The challenge that we face, however, is to exploit these positives further and by doing so, maximise everyone's talent, whatever that may be. And that is key. Talent does not necessarily equate to promotion or traditional career progression limited to rank. And it is equally not just a description of the top 10 to 15% of the Army, as some of our job descriptions may have us believe. But it is absolutely critical to the Army becoming match fit, and therefore should certainly generate some form of appropriate recognition. The complicating factors that are currently forming unintentional barriers to success must then be removed. And one of the most prominent barriers to collective long-term development of people is the lack of time available within the current appraisal system. The system pressures soldiers in particular to race through the ranks and does not necessarily provide due recognition to those who follow a slightly slower path, or indeed maybe a slightly faster path. And it is perhaps the greatest challenge for our future unit commanders, as members of maybe the least diverse group in the Army, and as clear beneficiaries of the current appraisal system, to open our minds to far more broad-based and brains-based routes to success. A solution, through a prospective unit commander's eyes, is to have enough delegation to allow officers and soldiers to benefit from, for example, time spent in industry attachments, on overseas defence engagement activities, on educational courses, including higher level academic courses or language training. And these initiatives could also complement flexible working at unit level and the promotion of private study and personal development. And then to mitigate the impact of creating this time and space in which our officers and soldiers can develop their knowledge, their skills and their experience, and indeed by doing so add value to the unit level and beyond, commanding officers will need some form of ability to contract in, for instance, civilian help, to perhaps fill gaps, such as hiring in a short-term driving instructor or an additional typist or clerk in the headquarters. And it's real actions like this that I believe will make a tangible impact on the ability for a unit to remain operationally effective, whilst at the same time preparing people for longer-term challenges. So further flexibility at unit level to decide on the best unit structure, to achieve operational effectiveness, and to mitigate those manning gaps will also support making time for our people. Development of individual knowledge, skills and experience and opportunities will no doubt have a positive impact at unit level. But truly developing talent requires a more holistic approach that is not just focused on individual career progression and lining up for the next appointment. And this could include specific job applications for appointments with evidence of suitable skills and experience rather than generic reports and preference recording. And this clear suitability must then not get trumped by a perceived level of quality on appointment boards. I think it's fair to say that appraisal, reporting and promotion systems shape behaviours, and they can, if not managed well, result in a short-term perspective. Commanders only have 2 years, and therefore may be uncomfortable with the risks that may only pay off beyond their tenure. And I recognise that this is not a new problem, but with so much new opportunity now available, it is something that my generation certainly believes can be changed. And this is the same generation for whom the term inclusivity and the term diversity are simply part of normal. And this is even more true of the younger generations, so the under 35s, a grouping to which I have reluctantly yet clearly fairly recently relinquished my membership, and particularly those joining the army today who are really, really young. And as part of ensuring that this normal remains, I think we must stop pushing small groups and individuals to the forefront because they represent some form of visible diversity, such as gender or sexuality or skin colour, because diversity is far more about making sure that views across a wide range of groups, organisations and people are taken into account, that they are valued and they are used to come up with ideas and to avoid groupthink. And we must seek as unit commanders to listen to everyone, avoid tokenism, understand the variety of views, and then use this diversity to nurture a truly inclusive team. Inclusivity at the unit level will be particularly important, I believe, to achieving match fitness. Now, inclusivity is where the team cohesion comes from. And this is not just the A team, but this is the whole squad. Because in order to field a match-fit team, you need a match-fit, multi-talented squad from which to choose. And this choice will change over time, and different teams will be needed for different tasks. And I am therefore talking here about genuine inclusivity, where the whole team, so the whole unit, feels a part of the team and valued for their own contributions. So careful thinking at unit level will be key, and recognising that sometimes those activities that are specifically designed to foster team spirit may in fact do just the opposite for some groups. The example of the Kirk muster, everyone together for a church service with separate provision for those who are non-Christian, actually ends up pushing the minorities to the fringes and not including them with the majority. I've touched on the appraisal system already and can confidently say that it will probably always serve the A team. It will serve the fast promoters. But where we must do better is ensuring that it can also serve those who follow, for instance, a slower promotion path, but who may be into diverse thinking. So the young officer embarking on a relevant PhD who may struggle to compete traditionally with her counterpart at regimental duty through the current appraisal system, but who can add real value to the thinking and development of long-term improvement, is the epitome of what we must nurture and reward. And we must go further, though, and ensure that this person also has a viable career path and is not then artificially barred from progression and further reward, and that their knowledge, skills, and experience must then be recognised as making them suitable for particular roles and must take precedence over a narrow view of perceived quality. So in sum, we must ensure we exploit every individual's talent, that we train in suitably qualified and experienced people, we provide appropriate career paths and routes to full potential for everyone. Achieving a balance between perceived quality and suitability is key, and at unit level, this can be achieved through engendering an inclusive environment that values diversity and removes barriers, yet does not seek to artificially highlight minority groups, driving them further away from the majority. So inclusivity must become the new normal for every generation.
So, having kept the diverse and adaptable range of people that Katie described, how can the Army get more from them than it does now? How can the coming generation produce the scale and range of innovation required to keep pace with a changing world and evolving threats? Get all of the available brains to contribute to the brains-based approach. At the Defence Academy, there is an elective running on the advanced course studying military innovation. And academic commentary is not encouraging. Many would say that armies cannot truly innovate because base-fed organisations insulate members from the wider experiences needed to generate free thinking. That where creativity exists, it's frequently suffocated by bureaucratic politics. This damning verdict is too bleak, and the judgmental tone is wrong. Armies are base-fed for good reason. You cannot buy in a competent battle group commander or troop sergeant. But if we recognise some truth in it, at a time when we need innovative thinking, then there is a problem. We heard yesterday from Tim Harford of the social pressure that creates groupthink. How do you create free thinking and embed learning in a conservative organisation that tends to conformity and resists change? There are, of course, several and many potential answers to this. Kieran will go on to describe some ideas we have on creating innovation in training. I want to focus on a single idea, that intellectual agility to think slow and fast, slow or fast, can help correct a deficit in innovation. That our people should become as comfortable in the brainstorm as they are in the chain of command, structured or flat, the pyramid or the plane. That we train people to recognize situations that require direction and those that require collaboration. How? Our structured, fast thinking is good, well practiced and admired. Our flat, slow thinking, much criticized. But it can be better by using creative design techniques and encouraging networking. These approaches can help us develop and encourage our people to be individuals of perpetual curiosity, capable of contesting ideas one day, following orders the next. They break down barriers. They rely on human relationships. They can't be forced. Some will be good at both. Some will excel in one or the other. Recognizing who can do what, rewarding unconventional talent, as Katie has set out, will help in getting the most of the whole squad, not just the star striker. We are, of course, doing lots of this now. Flat techniques to encourage creativity are practiced in headquarters. You heard Kirsten describe some of these yesterday, frequently drawn from design thinking in business schools, brainstorming, interrogating extreme users, and empathetic exercises are used now in operational planning and in running change programs. We have strong networks into academia and think tanks through individual high-level programs, the MPhil at Cambridge or the Associate Fellowship at Chatham House, although these programs need to be a launch pad, not a missing rung on the career ladder. Last year, 4 ACSC students were enrolled as fellows in the first iteration of the Forward Institute, a virtual institution connecting leaders from across business and the public sector. But at the lower level, Units have wide alliances and affiliations with other armies, services, and public bodies, creating opportunities for more ranks to glance sideways and learn. Our reserves follow hybrid careers with varied and unique perspectives. We can usefully use these examples to consider how a broader approach to encouraging and exploiting networking could evolve. 2 weeks ago, The Economist reviewed a book on business psychology, promoting the idea that promoting individual perseverance should be used over traditional methods to select leaders. It's damned with faint praise as mildly inspirational but pretty vague. Isn't design thinking or networking just the same? Managerial zeitgeist that will fade over time? Perhaps, but our recent experience is promising enough to suggest otherwise. We propose we should encourage and promote a pairing of flat design and networking in our peers and subordinates. Bring in practical guidance on design thinking techniques and creating networks to the Defence Academy, command courses, and below. Create time for people to maintain and build webs of relationships, then distribute and develop the ideas that come from them. The way networks should be thought of as a social organism argues against too much top-down intervention. In business, it's recognized that young networks are fragile and unpredictable. They can grow incredibly successfully in unexpected ways, but they're also vulnerable to shocks caused by bad behavior in places where they should have thrived. Practicing flat design at lower levels from junior non-commissioned officers and subalterns will help to identify who has the ability to exchange ideas unconstrained by hierarchy. Once commanding officers are confident in particular individuals, they can start encouraging them to establish networks, invest time, money, and support, and give their abilities formal recognition through the appraisal process. The more common the understanding that exists between organizations, the easier establishing and maintaining contact is likely to be. So a logical place to start for the unit commander might simply be an increase in the frequency of contact with allied and affiliated regiments, local Royal Navy and Royal Air Force units, with the employers of our reserves. For our young officers and non-commissioned officers to develop confidence that is required to engage with other external organizations, from mid-captaincy or corporal perhaps, and beyond. What we're not proposing is long placements, rather an afternoon for the operations officer in the ops room of the local police force, for the RCMO or the adjutant to spend the day in the human resource department of a local business. This will establish an approach to networking and solving problems that will stick and be carried further into our organization. Having ideas or stealing some as a conceptual magpie is the easy bit. Harvard Business Review recently said that we have too many ideas. The problem is not ideas, the problem is recognition. How can we recognize value? Get ideas to the people who might exploit them and make them stick. It was an ignored employee of Xerox who first had the idea of a personal computer. It was Apple that built it. What if an idea there has the potential to change the way we run the unit, change our tactics? Who recognizes the battle-winning idea when it comes from the middle third lance corporal, from a platoon commander in a paired reserve unit? Barclays Bank runs fintech innovation laboratories to create what it calls startup mentality, matching corporate strength and resource with small business creativity. It takes immature ideas and works them into viable business. We could also usefully learn from the US Marine Corps work on Think Days or the Australian Defence Entrepreneurs Forum. These balance creativity with substance. They develop both individual and idea. Some ideas will fail, but that's okay. The output is just as valuable when it's the encouragement and protection of personal creativity and risk-taking. Allowing one individual to fail in experimentation, to reward and not humiliate them for the attempt, can help turn the social tide from conformity to creativity, establishing the psychological safety that Kirsten and Hernan described yesterday. Now, different types of network are, of course, being created constantly and will be created in the future with or without intervention or guidance. Some are personal, with relationships likely to endure over a full career and beyond, and of great value to individuals. Others, while still relying on soft social skills, are likely to be functional, created by successive individuals and based on appointment. The point is that guidance will make them more effective. So what do we want from Army board level? Time to do this. Support and encouragement for growing networks. If we want to accelerate at SO1 and above, we could choose to invest more by enrolling more individuals in network-based leadership programs. Mentoring contact between senior officers and selected individuals at the higher level. Patience if the results are not immediately obvious. Training packages at the Defence Academy will come at cost, but relatively little. An investment in travel and subsistence for unit-level networking. Work on a shared platform on the Army Knowledge Exchange to filter and develop ideas. Innovation events to draw together diverse thinking about specific problems. A replication of the Israeli Defense Forces prizes for innovation. Why the chessboard? It comes from an image in Margaret Heffernan's book on the big impact of small changes. Networking gets people to think beyond their square on the chessboard, to recognize that the challenges facing them and the army are not unique, to make connections between their knowledge and the problems facing others. In the army, we can reciprocate and should be confident that we too have a lot to offer. Business is interested in our approach to leadership and the management of people. The other services want to understand and support us. Networks allow calibration of our approaches compared to others and innovation through conceptual plagiarism. It uses our people as metaphorical flag hills, able to see what's happening in the next valley. Pilots and exemplar projects are working now, and if we want the pace of innovation to accelerate, the next step is to inculcate this at the lower levels. If this does work, shift our culture, becomes part of our DNA, we think it will bring in ideas, concepts, and practices that can help us adapt. I don't know what any of those might be, and that's the point.
I'm not sure about just the red tabs feeling vulnerable. I'm a little like that myself. I'm going to start by trusting in Herman Naruli's advice of yesterday and accept that in order to succeed, I have to risk facing humiliation. In doing so, I will address some of the changes we could make in our approaches to training, enabling experimentation and the acceptance of failure in training, before I consider how we create time for commanders to develop their units. In Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, he tells us that anything that occupies your working memory reduces your ability to think. So we propose time needs to be available for units to think and to generate ideas about how to adapt to the challenges they will face. I will look first at training activity. British Army training is excellent, but imperfect for creating an adaptable force. The Formation Operational Readiness Mechanism, or form cycle, seeks to align people, instructors, resources, and training areas to enable units to conduct foundation-level training at the start of the cycle. However, our experience is that despite the best intentions, other stuff always gets in the way, complicating the delivery of this training at unit level, which induces unnecessary and inefficient duplication. My recommendation is that in the ongoing revision of the form cycle, space for foundation training must be properly protected, thereby allowing commanders to develop deep excellence in their unit's core and basic skills, developing excellence in the areas described yesterday as the tactical weeds. This may require us to rethink and prioritize the balance of skills that are really required. Current collective training prepares our units very well for their core role. However, allowing greater free play and low-level experimentation during which units are allowed to fail will enable units to develop original approaches and to learn from them, whether the approach was good or bad. While valuable lessons are derived from the current training regime, more could be gained by testing the force to failure. Dealing with failure and learning from it is crucial to developing leaders who have not been seduced into thinking they cannot lose. The outcome of our current approach to training and culture towards failure tends towards repressing creative, innovative, risk-taking approaches, and thereby limits a commander's ability and willingness to diverge from a normal template. To change this, we need opportunities to experiment in training, accepting failure without risk to the commander's career. Yesterday, General Finkel described the Israeli Defense Force model, in which the expectation of failure to achieve the mission is the norm in their collective training. This struck me as a very healthy approach. If you don't experiment to the point of failure, then you fail to experiment. And of course, occasionally someone will defeat the enemy despite the odds of failure, and we will be able to learn even more from them. British Army collective training tends to constrain the free play of the opposing force in order to ban the exercise for the training audience. We realise there are very good reasons for this, and in many stages of training, this is the right approach. However, and I accept this is anecdotal, the opposing forces in our collective training establishments tend to experiment more and feel they gain as much from the experience. They also tend to find it relatively simple to anticipate the tactical choices of the units under training, in part because the training audience is focused on completing very specific training objectives rather than seeking to accomplish their mission by winning. It feels like there is too much science in training design and not enough art, probably driven by a decade of campaigning and a requirement to have metrics against which the Army could argue for resource. Here, I would recommend that training should culminate with a genuine free-play force-on-force experience, but realise that this may currently be unaffordable. In the past, unit commanders had the flexibility to plan and develop their own training programs. It has been argued this helps develop an adaptive approach. Training should be a freedom. However, this is an area where tension exists between creating adaptability and the efficient use of resources, as Nick described. Perhaps the balance can be achieved through the clear prioritisation of targets rather than specifically directed collective training objectives. My second theme is that of creating time in units. Doing so is essential for commanders to be able to develop and exploit an adaptable brains-based approach in their units. However, I accept that it is difficult to argue for apparently free time when the Army is simultaneously being directed to be more productive when not on operations. It shouldn't surprise many of you to know that we feel the pace of life at units is too high. Routine activity impacts on the ability of commanders at all levels in units to think and act in novel ways, and in most cases concurrently stymies risk-taking and mission command in barracks. What we used to call the stuff in between continues to fix units. Most Army policy exists for very good reasons, either to ensure the Army operates within legal and safety constraints or simply to make the Army better. However, the time taken to enact the tasks directed to units is significant. My recommendation is that all new policies are produced with a clear assessment of the time it will take to implement and routinely enact the policy, and how risk could be taken when required against that routine activity. But just focusing on new policies will not change the current situation. Ideally, the Army would conduct a holistic review of extant policies to understand the burden on units, and perhaps more importantly, specific groups within those units. We wouldn't be surprised to discover that for many appointments, the mandatory workload exceeds the hours available for the individuals. This was essentially the conclusion reached in a 2015 paper for the US Army by Leonard Wong and Stephen Jarras called Lying to Ourselves, Dishonesty in the Military Profession, which begs the question of how our units are meeting their policy requirements. Are they working longer hours, thereby potentially undermining longer-term retention? Are they prioritising by cutting corners on some policies? Or are we being dishonest? Understanding how much activity is driven by policy would provide a clear metric of the impact of a new policy and a clear understanding of what needs to change in order to introduce that policy. Perhaps it's the policy itself. Maybe a compensating reduction needs to be made in another policy area or another activity area. Or it might be that we simply have to accept that we work longer hours. Understanding how long all these things take would actually allow a decision to be made on apportioning time to various tasks, such as training activity or assurance activity. There is also a risk that the search for perfection in some routine activity can become the enemy of the good. As a second in command, the regiment identified 75 specified tasks in annual orders emanating from the Army, divisional and brigade levels. While this in itself is a demanding requirement, some of these tasks were seeking to overachieve against directed standards in the hunt for excellence. In effect, the policy direction was enhanced as it passed through the layers of command, generating an ever-increasing workload at every stage. A good example would be when Commander Land Forces warned the Army he would start to develop language training across the Army. The division then gave specific targets, which the brigade increased. Without intending to, our enthusiasm and anticipation had created additional unresourced activity with no compensating reduction in another area. In summary, we need to protect planned training. We need to encourage commanders to experiment and maybe fail, rewarding their endeavour and assessing how they learn and develop from the experience. Training, as we said yesterday, should be about learning, not winning, so that we can win on operations. We are used to considering time as a constraint in operational planning, but less willing to do so in camp. Managing time is a zero-sum game, and Army policies and innovations must take this into account when directing activity or changes. And we should guard against creeping excellence in routine activity. This will ensure we create the time and the capacity to be able to think, to adapt, and to surge as required so that we can win when we really need to. We hope that even if these ideas are bad ones, as Tim Harford said yesterday, hopefully they'll help the discussion anyway. Thank you very much for your attention.